And you're live.
Okay, House Education, February 5th, 10 o'clock in the morning, 2025. I should put that in there as well. Next agenda item is to follow up on the discussion we had last week on the PCB testing program, and more specifically today, proposal in the budget for its continued funding and its future. Looking forward to getting some details on that from folks from the Department of Environmental Conservation. I think without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Matt Chapman on the screen to kind of walk us through the proposal.
Great, thank you. And thank you for my apologies for not being there in person this morning. So just to sort of follow up from our prior testimony, so the budget has been released, and there is a $9.5 million one-time general fund appropriation to the Department of Environmental Conservation for the purposes of mitigation and remediation at schools that have been tested. So it is not funding for testing new schools, and the goal of this money is to basically focus in on the schools that have already had issues identified and get them to a place where they are either mitigated or remediated. We are currently in the process of there are about 8 schools that we're looking at, of putting together what are called corrective action plans, which are basically the document that we work with the environmental consultants on to identify the scope of the issues that exist with respect to the environmental concerns, and then what the solution is, what the cost of managing that are. And so we're in various stages of development of that process. And I believe Trish Capolino was going to try and be present as well, so she may be able to.
She's here, Matt.
Oh, excellent. So Trish can probably walk you through in more detail, sort of, and more granularly, the projects, if that's something of interest to the committee. But I mean, I think that as I said, the focus for us, at least at the moment, is focusing the resources we have on the schools that have already been tested, and frankly, allowing time for the legislature to do the work that is before it, trying to make the larger policy decisions with respect to education governance and frankly, what the capital outlook might be for schools in the going forward state. I think it's also fair for us to say that we are working with our partners at the Agency of Education to see whether there's a way we can fold some of the work that we've been doing into the master planning and capital planning process that they're doing. So as these timelines sort of come together, whether there's an efficiency process that can be gained. So that conversation is also taking place. I think I'll pause there and ask if there are any questions about the larger sort of picture.
Yeah, thank you. So we just wrapped up a discussion on the future of school construction aid. You know, when you talk about working with the AOE on what the capital outlay future is, we haven't heard of one yet, that there is a capital plan from the AOE. But we would welcome your input as we go to craft a school construction bill here, where you think PCBs in general should fit in, and more specifically to those buildings that have already been affected and tested.
Sure, we would be more than happy to provide input into the structure that the committee is looking at. I mean, I think, you know, in many ways, I think it's an important element for a school to understand when they're doing reconstruction work, what level of investment is going to be needed to deal with all environmental issues from lead, asbestos, and PCBs. And since we know that a good portion of our schools do have challenges with these contaminants. So that's certainly as schools, and we've seen schools who are going through any capital planning process or school consolidation process have an interest in trying to figure out if they're going to make capital investments in a school, they want to know sort of what the contaminant issues are in their capital portfolio before they start making investments.
Yeah, we're just getting started, but if you have at some point specific thoughts as to, hey, here's some specific language you might want to put into the future decision-making tree of what gets approved and what doesn't for state assistance, we welcome the input.
Thank you.
Yeah. The 9.5 million, I suppose we could actually, you say we'll have Trish kind of walk us through the individual projects. But you did make a comment that said that this does not necessarily cover ongoing costs of the 8 that are being targeted.
Sure. I mean, I think that, and again, I'm sure this committee is aware both from your life and the work in the legislature, costs continuously are going up on any type of construction project, and these are both remedial and construction related projects. So we don't have firm numbers yet on all of the schools that we're planning to do work on. We're in the process of doing that. And again, Trish she knows exactly sort of where we are in the process and could probably walk you through better than I can. But that 9.5 million is a meaningful amount of money to get going on mitigating and addressing some of these concerns. But I don't know that it's going to cover everything in the schools that we're focused on.
Yeah.
And I guess I should also just add, I mean, the hope is to basically find out what the total cost to address things are, and then we can then look at what the costs of mitigation are, what the costs of total cleanup are, and work with the school to try and come up with a strategy that meets those local needs.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I often think also about those schools that, sort of have this ongoing cost of repeated testing over and over again, which I'm not sure if there's an end in sight for that.
Sure. I mean, I think Trish can probably walk you through the sort of ongoing monitoring that's needed and where that fits in sort of the work that we're doing.
Great. Thank you. Trish, why don't you come up and join us and maybe walk us through some of the projects here, and then we can open up to questions. Morning.
Hi. Trish Capolino, Vermont DEC Contaminated Sites Program. We are working on 6 schools right now. And so we're using funding that we have currently available to us to fill what we call data gaps. So we have information that says there are PCBs in these schools. Some of them have had enough sampling so that we know where all the PCB sources are, and some of them still need a little more data collection, mostly building material sampling, so that we can ensure when we do the cleanup or when we evaluate cleanup options that we're looking at all of the different sources and all of the different ways to take care of those sources. All of the schools that we're working on right now outside of North Country have had, let me go back a second. The schools that we're going to work on are SOAR in St. Albans, North Country Union High School in Newport, Bellas Falls Union High School in Rockingham, Green Mountain Union High School in Chester, Twin Valley Elementary School in Wilmington, and Hartford High School in Hartford. Some of these schools are in various stages of work that have or have not been completed, so I can go through each one of them. I would say for SOAR, we have collected all the data we need to collect, so there's no more data collection needed. The next step for SOAR and a lot of these schools is what we call an environmental corrective action alternatives document. And this document is designed to look at all of the different types of contamination that exists. And this is for any site that we manage. And then look at some different criteria. So cost to take care of them, long-term obligations associated with any long-term monitoring that might need to be there, effectiveness immediately and over time, and then community involvement and community desire. So we look at all of those different options, but we look at each cleanup option. And so for the different cleanup options, they can range from encapsulation to removal to a mix of encapsulation and removal to demolition. And the consultant will go through each option and each media that's contaminated and come up with a matrix for the schools to look at and decide which one makes the most sense for their future of that building. So SOAR is going to move into an ECA, and we're going to have that document written by the consultant, and then we'll meet with the school and their school board to look at what option they think is the best option for them. For North Country, we are working with their school design board. So they're looking at what they want to do with their school to come up with options that will fit into that. I think their biggest discussion points are whether or not they're going to renovate the C wing or build a new C wing, or and what they're doing with the B wing. And so they're working through large planning exercises and integrating PCB issues that still exist in the school into that, so then we can work with them on an ECA. For Bellas Falls Union High School, they have an ECA right now for a portion of work that needs to be done. We're going to fold that into a larger ECA to look at all of the residual issues that exist in the school. So for Bellas Falls, they have some spray on fireproofing in some of their locker rooms, which is impacting their gym space. And they're trying to work through whether or not to put on a new roof or not put on a new roof. And so they're having that conversation tonight at their school board meeting, and they have an ECA to look at that will help inform them on removal of everything to long-term costs. And I've asked the consultant to carry those costs out for at least 30 years, so it's not blind to them what those costs are. For Green Mountain Union High School, they are doing the last set of data collection right now so that we have a comprehensive understanding of where all the PCB sources are. Mostly it looks like they need new windows. There's a lot of the caulking in the windows is the highest source. They really probably need window replacement, which in and of itself, if you're doing capital improvement, is a great capital improvement. For Twin Valley, we are hopefully turning on their air handling unit next week. So they have the majority of the large contaminant issues taken care of. The next phase will be the smaller pieces that aren't causing the larger impacts, but are still causing impacts. And so that'll be another ECA for them with a cleanup. And for Hartford, we finished collecting all the data, and now we're moving into an ECA for them.
When you talk about collecting data, this is like drilling holes in walls to see if the PCBs have migrated from caulking into masonry, that sort of thing.
So we will do collecting masonry samples to, we don't go to non-detect, and I know this has been something that some of the schools have talked about, because we have enough data for the consultant to actually give a cost estimate to non-detect. So they can choose 0 PCBs and not have to sample 2 0 PCBs. So that's a hard conversation to have with some schools, but that is something that we ask the consultant to include in the ECA so that they can choose which one meets the best option for them. But we also look at the paint samples. There are a lot of high paint concentrations at Hartford, as well as jointing materials.
Your list did not include schools that have been affected by PCBs. I'm thinking of Cabot specifically. And I guess sort of what's the status of those schools that have been impacted but aren't part of this $9.5 million appropriation?
Truthfully, for Cabot, we've been waiting for them to tell us what they want. I know they had a change in superintendent, and we've been doing additional air sampling in their gym, which is the impacted space. There were 2 things with Cabot. One is that they didn't have a comprehensive corrective action plan. So they had, I think it was they have separate buildings there. Their art building had PCBs in it. And so we asked the consultant to give us a comprehensive document that would take care of all the PCB issues. But we also asked the school to give us some guidance and direction on what they actually wanted to have as an outcome. We haven't gotten that yet from them. We also asked the consultant to go back and recalculate some of the costs because we weren't sure that he actually did a good job looking at multiple vendors for different costs.
And then they, in that same supervisory union, that there were issues at Twinfield and Danville. They didn't sound like they were major issues, but what's the status of smaller impacts like that?
For some schools, we have money budgeted for quarterly sampling, and so we're continuing to do indoor air sampling. They have air filters installed in them. If we have small dollar amounts and small projects, then I would love to try and take care of those projects as well, but I don't have money to take care of all of those smaller projects that are less impact.
And then the sort of philosophy with the money is to focus it on those areas that affect education as opposed to the janitor's closet that has PCBs.
Correct. So our focus is on what we call primary spaces, so classrooms, library, gym, cafeteria, auditoriums that have IAL exceedances, so immediate action level exceedances where we are reducing time or reducing access. So that is the primary focus right now, and a lot of these schools have that. And then our secondary focus would be where we still have high SAL exceedances in primary spaces, and we're using carbon filters or something else to try and reduce concentrations, knowing that that's not something that can happen and continue, knowing that there's a slight disruption to the sound of those filters, but we are reducing impacts. And then we'll work to the ancillary spaces, which are bathrooms and hallways and other places like that.
This may be a better question for Matt, but if you have, so, one of the big long-term issues is the EPA's rule that you need, and I know you've been working with the EPA to deal with that. I guess my question is what do you think the EPA is going to even look like in a year? Do you have any, and where is that falling into all of this?
I mean, I'm happy to go ahead and take that one. So, I mean, I'll take sort of the first part, which is we have heard back from EPA. EPA has let us know that they have been granted that headquarters has basically given the regions flexibility in how they allow material to remain on site as long as risks are controlled, right? So that it basically Region 1 has been an amazing partner to work with in the context of this, and Region 1 is our region of EPA that we directly deal with, and have done an amazing job of working nationally to sort of illuminate the challenges of a law that was written primarily to deal with like PCBs and transformers, to trying to make it work in the context of what we're dealing with in schools. And in effect, that we have been working with them, and it's not final yet, but that basically as long as we are managing risks and continuing to monitor, and last year the legislature gave us some authority to put sort of use restrictions on things. So where an appropriate sort of document needs to be in place to ensure that uses are managed appropriately, that all of these things will, and by that I mean like that paint gets repainted when there's an encapsulating paint, or some of these sort of maintenance issues that need to happen to make sure that risk is appropriately managed. I think EPA is comfortable allowing materials to be left in place for a reasonable duration, and I think that part is a conversation with the school around what their sort of planning horizons are with their capital construction needs. So as far as the larger issue of where EPA is at, I mean, I think the members of the committee's understanding and guess is probably as good as mine.
Fair enough.
If I could just add on to that, I mean, the largest issue has been that EPA was requiring that there was removal of PCBs if they were greater than 50 parts per million materials, and the work that we were able to have with EPA now allows us to leave materials in place longer without having to have that time frame for removal. So that was the conversation that we had. Ultimately, though, there are still state requirements that require the disposal of these PCBs at the same concentration that EPA was talking about, as well as the process that I just laid out, which was the ECA, and then eventually, once the remedy is chosen, would be a corrective action plan. That document is how we set up what we call notification to EPA, and my intent is not to finalize those corrective actions. We we actually know that we have funding to help pay for the work that's in them, or make sure that the cap that is finalized does have funding to help pay for it.
So you sort of have an ECA would be kind of a preliminary action plan that sort of needs some more refining. Then there would be an corrective action plan. In a world where the EPA is doing its thing, that's really when the clock starts ticking.
Correct.
And even with that, what you're hearing is that they are willing to sort of work with deadlines if there's progress being made moving forward.
Correct.
So,
When we have these, we do meet with EPA informally and say, here's what we're planning, what we're thinking about, and how we're evaluating these options, and EPA provides feedback on whether or not it is meeting the intent of their regulations. So we have those meetings in advance of moving forward with the doc.
assuming the people at EPA haven't taken a fork in the road to be more productive citizens in the private sector.
Correct.
Do you have any questions besides me? Or comments? Brady?
So there's 9.5 million should cover the remaining work of those 6 facilities you listed. Is that a fair summation?
I don't think so. I think we will have documents that give us a cost estimate for what all of the remaining work is. And then we'll have to make some hard decisions on how we allocate the funding.
What we're really saying is that, okay, these 6 are the ones that we mentioned. We still don't really have a good handle on what the long-term cost is. And the 9.5 million is to continue mitigation and remediation, but also to get a much better handle on like really what's this going to cost going forward decades.
Correct.
Just, do we, I'm sure you do know, how many schools in Vermont have not even been tested yet? I was trying to go back through the other and I couldn't find it and I thought maybe you'd have it up.
Let's see, there are 324 schools and we
Yeah.
have 156 of them.
156.
156.
Thank you. Yeah.
And you know, there's a priority list which has
Right.
evolved both politically and scientifically. Of schools that still haven't been tested that qualify under this, because we sent them the data instruction. All right, anybody else? Great, thank you both very much for the information today. And again, Matt, any sort of input you want to provide in the future towards like, okay, if you guys are coming up with a construction program, here's how we believe hazardous materials should fit into that. That'd be very helpful.
All right, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
All right.
All right, we'll
Thank you.